we have designed our systems that can scale for any number. So since this is IPL season, and that's where some of our clients expected a large number of users logging in at the same time. So they expected like nearly 200 million users logging in at the same time.
The USP of CleverTap is you can see real-time data. I usually try to bring in all these big changes when Google tells everyone to update their Android versions, because that is the version gets adopted the most.
So Tesseract migration was a big one because we were moving to a completely different format. So there we had implemented reconciliation methods where something that was before should be exactly same as after. Apart from the technical skills is the clarity in the thoughts or the clarity in the ideas, because we strongly believe that given a problem, if you are able to think it out clearly, you can break it down into multiple parts and solve it those individual modules.
If you're looking to solve problems which have not occurred before, you can't have answers ready, right? Like you need to think, you need to experiment, you need to try.
Now, one of the key things when we start engaging with is giving an omnichannel experience. If someone tells me in the IPL tomorrow that, oh, you know what, we want to be able to send 1 billion notifications per some units of time. Okay, sure, we do the math and we make the necessary infrastructure available.
Hi, welcome to yet another episode of SCALER Pod. And today, for the first time, we have two guests with us. We have Hardik and we have Darshan, both of them engineering leaders from CleverTap. Darshan, somebody with whom I have worked across API boundaries for a long time.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'll start off with a question which sort of is like my typical go-to icebreaker for most people and I'll ask to both of you one by one, which is what does a typical day at work look like for each of you? So maybe Hardik, you can go first.
Yeah, so my typical day of work starts with catching up with Slack. So we have a Slack culture rather than an email culture. We catch up with different product managers and different QA, what's going on, if there are prod issues. And the first couple of hours go there. Post that, you get onto things, you code, we code every day. Even the engineering managers, all our engineering managers code every single day. And then you spend time with junior folks who are getting stuck in different problems. We have a culture of helping, not just your own team, but even an extended team. That's how the typical day looks like.
Okay. And how does your day look like?
Yeah, for me, it's pretty much the same. It's like we start off as soon as I reach office, it's catching up with emails and whatever has gone on the previous night, and then it's so multiple things, right? Because I have currently some 12-member team, so Android, iOS, web. So everyone has their own set of problems. So tackle them one by one. Then there is usually stand-ups are around in the evening around 3-4. Yeah, and then we continue. So after that, it's more like what are status checks on projects. Now it's a new quarter is going to start up, so it's going to be what are we going to build in the future, and planning and meetings regarding that.
Right. So I will ask one question to each of you about your tech journey so far, and then we will start delving a little bit into what all tech challenges you have at CleverTap, because I have a lot of questions around that. But yeah, maybe with Darshan, if we can start. So how has your tech journey been so far, before CleverTap, now here?
So usually I start off with once I finish engineering, right? But today I want to go a step back.
Sure, definitely.
Final year of engineering, everyone has projects to do, right?
Yeah.
So at that point of time, I was everyone was doing image processing. So that was the theme of that year. Everyone is doing image processing.
When was this?
2012.
11,
12. So everyone was into image processing and MATLAB at that point of time. And I was I don't want to do this. And at that point of time, Samsung Galaxy Pop had come out. The first Android phone in India, apart from Huawei.
Yes. Targeted towards college people, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was cheap enough that you could convince your parents to buy you that phone.
Yeah.
So I was let's build an app. And we had one IBM machine, one IBM laptop of my friend, which had enough RAM to support Eclipse at that point of time.
Eclipse, yeah.
So somehow we built an app, and we showcased it, and that year it got over. And then after my college placements, I got placed into Accenture right here in Bellandur.
Okay.
So now that from all that Android stuff is gone. So I started as a Java developer in Accenture, and so I was here for a year and a half, and I was in Mumbai for a year and a half, Accenture offices. And then after that, I was like, it's probably not going anywhere. So I took a bit of a risk. A couple of my friends from college, they were like, we are gonna do a startup in Powai. I was like, what do you want me for? They're like, we want a backend engineer in Java. So I was like, okay. So I put down my papers at Accenture, served my 3-month notice period. I joined them, and in those 3 months, they wrote their entire backend in Node. So the day I joined them, I'm like, you hired me as a Java developer to write your backend. So you didn't write your backend in Java. So what am I going to do?
Right.
So they're like, okay, our backend is ready. Our app was outsourced to some freelancers to do it, and there was some delay on their end. So they were like, can you look into that? And I was read up about now Android was like 3 years back.
A lot,
yeah. So I was like, let me catch up what's happening in Android. And I was like, okay, it's still Java, so I can still pick it up. So I took the project, I think it was 75% done.
Yeah.
I picked it up and took a month to self-learn Android again, and that's how I got into Android. And I was like, this is it. Like, I think this is where I can find my footing and my career over here. Unfortunately, that startup didn't work out. Then I joined a health tech startup called Dawaibox. That also, I was there for another 8 or 10 months. That also wasn't going anywhere, and that's when one of our colleagues reached out to me that CleverTap is hiring. And I was like, probably. And by that time, at the earlier startup and at the Dawaibox, I had known CleverTap. Like they were making waves in the Indian market, and I was like, maybe I might not crack it. So I was procrastinating for a week, and he reached out to me. He's like, send me a resume at least. Like, I was like, okay. I sent him my resume. In a week, I was hired into CleverTap, and I joined them as the first Android SDK developer.
Okay, nice. And how has your journey been?
Yeah, so I mean, after completing my computers at VJTI, I was hired with Microsoft. So it was a purely tech role into the kernel space of the Windows component.
Oh.
Yeah,
Nice.
so that in the graphics. So like the graphics drivers and the thing of, the 2000s.
DirectX stuff.
Yeah, so DirectX, exactly. All those stuff. So all those, it was the same team that I worked in. So after 2 years, I was always fascinated by the trading industry.
Okay.
So that's when I came across a role at Credit Suisse. Of course, it's in the news for the wrong reasons, but yeah. So it was a high frequency trading role where I had to work with the New York teams basically. So there we developed a lot of scalable systems which tried to make money in those microseconds, milliseconds. And when I actually left Credit Suisse, the system that I built, that me and my team built, was trading about $1 billion every day on the US markets. So that was also trading across multiple asset classes, multiple locations, and making use of those the microwaves of the world and everything to get the data at the highest possible speed. So that was a very interesting experience. And in fact, we used kernel bypass to increase our throughput and reduce our latencies and so on. So it was a very close to the metal role. But again, I was more fascinated by for doing the machine learning stuff of things. So basically developing these machine learning models that trade automatically on the markets.
Right.
So that's where I joined a couple of hedge funds. In fact, I ran my own book in my last stint. And after that, I joined CleverTap. Again, it was my passion for technology and my desire to, deal with a very high scale.
Right.
And that's when, talking with Suresh, Anand, and everyone, I realized that, this looks to be the nice place to be.
Right. So, by the way, because you just mentioned scale, so talking about scale, just a ballpark figure at across all the different people who are using CleverTap, how many sort of events in a second or in a minute you're processing right now?
Yeah, so for us, like we have designed our systems that can scale for any number. So just to give you an example, like so since this is IPL season,
Yeah.
and that's where some of our clients expected a large number of users logging in at the same time, because they open suppose the match starts at 7:30, then everyone actually opens the app at 7:30, right? So they expected like nearly 200 million users logging in at the same time.
Right.
We clocked 300 million per minute without any issues. Like
300
there was
users
zero
per
lag.
minute.
Users per minute, yeah.
And it should be, I guess, across multiple apps,
Now,
because
this was
everybody's running something related to
Exactly.
IPL.
This is for one account. Mind you, like we had that infrastructure ready that any and every account could leverage that kind of a throughput.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, like it's more of a driven, like the customer needs to be able to send that kind of data. Like
Right.
sometimes if they are pushing data from their own servers,
Right.
they may not hit that kind of a throughput. But if there are these individual users opening their apps, definitely we can process that kind of throughput without any lag.
Right. And when this sort of scale sort of happens, and you are the person responsible for the agents inside those apps which is sending all of this data, I believe that this scale also brings challenges of the variety of places where it is running, right? I mean, you support Android, iOS, web, plus I think bunch of other smaller platforms and all as well. And I believe like at IPL time, you literally see like the widest spectrum of devices on all sorts of network and all. So what kind of challenges happen on the client side when this kind of a scale happens, like IPL comes, 300 million people will open it?
That's a very interesting question, because the scale is like, just take Android, right? Like just the sheer amount of devices which are supporting Android and its custom versions is a lot. So first I'll start with Android. So now there are multiple OEMs, and not the best code is running in those very niche OEMs. But so like the preparation for this is like right from the start, right? Because then you can't use something which is very custom. Whatever architecture you're using in your SDKs has to be the most commonly used thing, so that you are not using something which is custom or can be broken or can be modified, and even keep everything simple, right? Like we have our own networking class or network manager to deal with. So we are not using any other library to do networking. So things like that. So image handling or rendering push notifications, all that is done by the SDK itself. And everything is close control. Everything is in our control, so that we know that okay, this is some stable code which can run across the most number of devices. And then obviously there are still edge cases, even in Android, even in now. And then when it comes to web, so then it's again like it's running on the browsers, it's running on web OSs, on TVs. So again, in that case also, like everything is very limited in the way it is built, so that there is limited risk, as in like if I'm using some other library, it becomes, and if that library has a problem, then it becomes my problem and that library's problem, and maybe they are not as receptive as I want to be to our customers.
Right.
So
you'd want to have the lowest common denominator of things available on all the platforms which you would want to use, right? And I think for you particularly, like I think when sort of the data is coming into the backend and all, you can still maybe upgrade the server at the last moment. But for the SDKs that go into the clients, that's something you have to be prepared for from a long time back. Like your SDK goes to somebody's app, and then their app needs the adoption and all of that. So I mean, how long back do you have to sort of prepare for like big events when you're expecting like things can go wrong or something?
So the basic fundamental architecture has always been the same since, I think I've been in CleverTap for like almost 5.5 years now. It has been the same, and we do very minimal changes to that because something like, a network module or, the queuing mechanism in the SDKs, those things cannot be changed because again, even if we do it, it'll take probably like a year for anyone to adopt it completely, like their end users to to adopt it. So we do not change that as much, but there are still, because there is feature development still happening, there are new features getting added as a product from the SDK point of view as well. So what we do is that getting all the processes in terms of having unit testing, having a proper CI/CD, having all the code reviews in place, even the manual processes, one person who's gonna do the code review is in charge of the release and stuff like that. Yeah. All those processes, automatic, digitally automatic, as well as manual human intervention also, all those processes have been put in place so that we put in the least number of bugs because when such an event is happening at this scale, we do not want crashes on the app side anywhere on any platform because of us.
Right.
And on a lighter note, a lot of try catches.
Defensive coding. I think that's very important. One more thing, actually, I'm just doubling down on that. I'm fairly curious because with you not having a, let's say, consumer app, so it's not easy for you to test things out on, let's say, 1 billion people, but your library goes into products which go to 1 billion people. So how do you really test out what will happen when it goes to 1 billion people?
Are you asking from an SDK point of view?
If from SDK point of view.
From an SDK point of view, so initially it was, we've done a lot of approaches. Initially it was buy the lowest model, and if everything works there, then it will work everywhere. But that was okay till some time because now Android, there are new devices coming out every year. So and those worst devices per se are not available anymore. So you can't even get them. There's no worst device right now. Everyone has like a 2 GB RAM at least, and like a 128 GB storage, and and everyone is like, okay, we are the best phone, right? So that didn't work out. So then we bought like a suite of it, right? Okay, so like one Xiaomi, one Huawei, one stock Android, one iPhone, and in iPhone also. So iPhone or iOS is more stable, as in once you get
variations
the update,
are less.
The variations are less. So a few phones on iOS. So again, that worked for some time. Now what we've done is that we are using browser stack, run our automation tests on, and those are again they have the lowest version devices and the highest version devices, and if everything works on that, because it's physically impossible to test on all devices unless probably we start our own device farm or something somewhere. But then I think for now that's the only solution I've found for this. Right. And then work with the backend folks and imitate scale. Right. So there's a very small gap then it remains, is that okay, if they can scale up quickly and they can keep sending responses to the SDK, then we just need to ensure that we are handling it right.
Right.
So little help from backend as well.
Yeah. Nice. I'm sure even then, you do discover when your library goes into some some of your consumers, and then some of their users use something, and you find out, oh, there's this device also.
Not only this device, it's more like this library, or so as such we have very dependency on very limited libraries. It's either the core Android libraries or Firebase for push notifications and all that. I think the discovery part is more so this Android library has a bug, which is surprising because the standards are too high. And it's also fun that we found something, we broke someone's code, or something like that.
I think I remember when I was using your SDK and I was at Zomato that time, and we faced some bug, and it was because of some library inside, and then I was very intent in knowing why is it broken? And Darshan, we talked first time I think over a GitHub issue, and he's like,
Yeah.
it's fixed. I don't know. Like, why was it broken though?
Yeah. In my defense, I was the only Android developer at that point of time.
Yeah.
So I was like, why is he asking why is it fixed? It's fixed.
Nice. On the on the sort of data processing side, and I'm sure that this is something that would be very interesting for a lot of people who would be watching this to know about. Like, a lot of times, you start out, let's say, in a consumer app, engineering journey, you know that okay, there is a analytics library that our product uses, and you put in the SDK, put in a JS file, whatever, and you launch, millions of people are using it, and when you go to your dashboard, there is like fairly real-time data, like 1 minute back, how many events happened and all. And why I'm asking this question is because for a lot of people just starting out into engineering, working on consumer products, it might not always be very transparent as to what all transpires behind the scenes to make it happen.
Correct.
Right? Because if somebody has delved a little bit into it, you know that how challenging it is. So, I just asked that volume, like where, millions of events are, getting pushed every second, what all really transpires to make it happen that on a dashboard you open and you actually see that my users 5 minutes back, they placed an order, I can actually see that order data there.
Yeah. So typically when the Darshan's SDK sends, the reason I'm calling Darshan's SDK is because I think he has worked for the most part on the SDK part.
Yeah.
So when the CleverTap SDK sends the data to our public endpoints, we have a lightweight collector. Now the reason we have a very lightweight collector is because we don't want to do a bulk of processing there. So there we do some basic validations. There are some other exceptions that we also do there, but otherwise we subject it to a queue, some kind of a queue. Now these are your real-time queues which push the data further into your backend storage.
Okay.
Now backend storage is where we have our proprietary in-house database, where your data is present, some part in memory, some part in disk, and some part on object storages and all.
Right.
So a combination of all these, and again, the right combination is arrived using really scientific means, that how much data we need at what place to be able to achieve a desired throughput.
Right.
So now, like whenever you open a dashboard or when you try to see what is happening in real time, your data is coming in from multiple sources, right? I mean, like you have an ingestion counter, you have some data in your storage where you can actually go and do analyze. Like say for example, if I have run a campaign to my users who have not come to my app for the last 30 days, right? Now I have sent those notifications to the users. Now I want to be able to see whether that campaign is effective or not, right?
So whether people opened it
exactly.
and all that.
So now a very simple thing that I want to do is people who have done app launched and have done your the people who have been sent the notification and have done an app launch.
Yeah.
Now technically in our the set theory thing, this is not the right way to attribute it, because he should have done an app launch after you send the notification.
Yeah.
So that we attribute using a funnel. So we have these various analytics suite in which you can build funnels, cohorts, and mind you, all these are processing billions of data points at the same time.
Yeah.
And we also leverage a multi-sharded architecture. So all our loads is distributed across multiple machines doing processing at the same time. So right from the public endpoint all the way to our database storage, all the way to the message delivery services, everything is extremely highly distributed. And they could be scaled up and down based on the requirements and based on how much load and what does the customer need.
Right.
Now that is the key, right? I mean, if someone tells me in the IPL tomorrow that, oh, you know what, we want to be able to send 1 billion notifications per some units of time. Okay, sure, we do the math and we make the necessary infrastructure available.
Right.
So I mean, so that is a key point that has helped us scale very well, is the ability to scale up and down based on the needs of the customer.
Right. And like sometimes like the analytics we are viewing is something like, if you want to make a segment of people who have gotten notification and then open the app within 10 minutes of that happening.
Right.
So those kind of slices that we are viewing, how is that being possible?
Yeah. So again, we have our backend storage, which is proprietary, and there we process events and we process user profiles data. So say for example, if you are storing various user properties like the place where you live, say a gender, say if my data science team as a customer has figured out that these are my users, who are my loyal customers, right? So some analytics you've performed and you figured that these are my loyal customers. So like you could actually make this part of the profile property itself, and then like treat this user to effectively engage with him. Now, one of the key things when we start engaging with is giving an omni-channel experience. Now, what do I mean by omni-channel is like if I have an email, if I have a push, if I have an SMS, right? I have various mechanisms. Suppose you have multiple devices, right? Now, I don't want to reach out to the same user on different channels at the same time.
Yeah.
So users could have journeys and effectively. So for example, like see, one of the biggest problems that we actually solve is retention, right? Now, if you have spent a lot of money acquiring a user,
right,
you want to be able to retain him for a longer time and generate revenue out of him, right? Now, in order for you to be able to do that, you can actually have journeys. So like first time a user comes, what do you subject him to? Based on the various steps he takes, you can actually design a flowchart and automatically those users will be engaged without you intervening, right? You talked about an important point around segmentation.
Yeah.
Because like I want to be able to tell who are my great users, right? People who basically charge is your checkout. So the people who have charged in my last 30 days, these are my, again, good users who I want to be able to treat and effectively engage differently compared to someone who has not come to my app in the last 30 days. So for them, it could be some like promotional thing trying to get him back onto the app, versus to these people, it would be more of an experience or even making the experience better. So that's how the segmentation and creating different kinds of segments. So again, the segmentation is mutually exclusive for one particular segment, but you can create so many multiple segments that the user can be a part of multiple segments.
Right.
So that way, each marketeer, the problem he's addressing, can find different ways to engage with users.
Right. And another thing is which I would like to know about a bit is on basically the temporal axis, like the kind of things like if I'm using CleverTap's SDK, the kind of things I want to see live and real time. There would be a bunch of use cases like how many people are online right now, how many people placed orders, last 10 minutes, how many people placed orders. And even the last 10 minutes I'm considering as part of my definition of live and real time, versus there's also going to be a lot of things I would want to know about last 1 year of data as well, right?
Yes.
Like how many people order once a month, and I want that information about last 1 year, right?
Correct.
And of course, like the kind of things you do to make the real-time data available, I'm sure it's not possible to do that over 5 years of data or something like that, right?
No, so we don't have a limit for that.
You don't have, so do you deal with data any differently for the views which are more real time or the views which are across a long period of time?
Correct. So mind you, we have a lot of customers who have a DRP or data retention period of 10 years for some of their key events.
I think financial institutions usually have that.
Financial institutions, and there are so many customers. So for example, if I have 100 events, now an event like an app launch, I might be okay just seeing it for a year. But say a charged event, I want to retain it for 10 years or 20 years, right? So again, different events the customers ends up configuring based on their requirements to how much DRP they want to have.
Right.
Now the events that go back in the history, we store them differently. Like it's not the same storage structure. Again, it's optimized based on the speed of the throughput requirement for such queries. Now, for example, if we are processing 100 queries, we know only 5% of the queries go far back into the history.
Right.
So it is okay if we store it on a slightly slower data structure. Again, those things are offset by writing some kind of a prefetch models and other advanced stuff that help us get the same throughput irrespective of the kind of storage we are dealing with.
Right. Because, for example, I think, say even like charged events, so there are fairly large number of products where I think, let's say, 1 million transactions a day is happening. It's not a very big scale for like let's say paid transactions. Many places happening. I mean that happening over let's say 1 year itself, that's like 300 million. So if you have like 5 years of history, that's gonna be billions, right?
Correct.
So if someone wants to see last 5 years how many people placed orders worth 500 rupees or more, that means it's a query that has to happen over that size, right? So there, if such a query is sort of showing me a result on a dashboard within 2-3 seconds, how is that optimization happening? Is it like you work with the clients to understand that these are the types of queries you will usually do?
So actually we, so for the older data, we actually put the data in a columnar format.
Okay.
Versus our near data is in slightly in a row-wise format, which is more real-time in nature. Now in the columnar format, you get an advantage that since you know the query that you are executing, you don't need to read full data. You just need to read a part of it. And that's where we gain that advantage of the slower storage being fast enough, because on an overall basis, you still are at the same throughput. So we do not optimize based on the customer's requirements or what customers tell you, but it is already optimized such that you can think of it this way, right? Because the columnar data, so for example, so let's assume that this data is, like 5 gigabytes, right? Now, if you are reading just say 2 columns out of 10, our data is actually stored in such a way that you read only 10 or 20% of that full data.
The ones you're querying through. Or
once we are querying through. So the ones that actually make it to a slower storage have data stored in an optimized fashion that helps us compensate for the throughput.
Understood.
Yeah.
The other part of like dealing with data of this scale, and I will go to Darshan for that, is obviously from the SDK itself, like if it's literally like a fire hose of billions of data, obviously that would have challenges in scaling the backend automatically. So I'm sure that there are optimizations in place, like batching of data and all. So what are those optimizations? You can shed some light that sort of helps make sure that the pipeline is not getting like clogged with literally unparsable amount of data.
Yeah. So the batching is a little less, because again the USP of CleverTap is you can see real-time data. So for example, when I joined CleverTap, usually everyone's first task is you integrate the SDK in your own app and see the product, right? So as soon as I did an event, I go to the dashboard, I do a refresh, and it's there, right? So from that level, the batching is just a 1 second batching. So usually events are in a burst, right? Like you click, click, click.
Yeah, there are a lot of flows where going through the flow generates like 5 events probably just by doing an action. That's how people set up analytics, right?
Correct. So all that will probably get bunched in that 1 second itself, right? So that is on the batching side of it. But from our most of the optimizations are on the network side of things, like because it's a queuing mechanism. So any event goes into the queue, it hits the endpoint, and if it, let's say, if the servers are busy or whatever, we have to retry. And as like the backend is distributed like different AWS servers and all that. So depending on the scale, we have modified our retry mechanisms based on the scaling or based on the region in which we are sending the data. And I think that's it. That mostly controls it in a way. We are still working on more optimizations on giving more probably granular control to the backend to be able to a volume sort of a knob that probably they can use on the backend itself to control the flow of the data coming from the SDK.
Got it. And then there's obviously the other use case where there would be flows where the user is offline, but events are still needed to be tracked, right? And while the app will definitely call your SDK, the SDK can't actually send that event to and that could be for a fairly large period of time sometimes, like maybe 5 minutes of offline period where some events. So how is that handled on your end?
So One, like it's like an inherent optimization is that our events, or at the end of the day, it's some JSON data which is flowing in, right? Like so, it's key value pair. So we try to keep everything very short, and then in the cases where it's offline, no network and or no network and deliberately offline.
Yeah.
Right. So in that case, we have like a 20 MB. Up to 20 MB storage. Now, since the event data is in like few KBs, it can go up to like, up to 1 million events in storage, right? So, and then as soon as the network is hit, everything is like hit in a batch of 50 to, keep sending it to the server until you drain out the storage.
Yeah,
or
you can't
the
send
storage.
that 20 MB chunk in one go also.
Yeah, you can't. So it's
flush
like
it out gradually.
50 events batch, and we send it. So yeah, I think, and that, again, like 20 MB was like earlier it felt like it was arbitrary, but now it's like I'm pretty sure that it covers all the cases. Like you just cannot have. That means your user is gone. Basically, if he's offline for so many number of days, that means that your user is technically gone. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And for a normal use case, like I'm in my flight, but I still was watching a movie, and I did a few clicks here and there, which were supposed to be events.
Yeah.
Those will anyways come back when I land and I hit the network again.
Yeah. And then processing that data that sometimes comes late, is that a challenge?
Yeah, so it is not much of a challenge. We handle it in the exact same way that we get the real-time data. The challenge that we face is that sometimes if the data is too much out of order, right? So then, like managing it in the backend, right, in a consistent way. So we definitely that is something we handle in the backend in such a way that it gives a consistent view to the user. So imagine like if you are querying a time window, right? If some number is say 100 million today, right now, and for the data that is backfilled in, right, those 5,000, 10,000 numbers, they keep on going up.
Right.
So sometimes we just get customer queries saying that, like why is this going up? And then we have to that this is the backdated data that is
filling
that backfilled up. So
Yeah.
so that is a challenge. Otherwise, like from the storage point of view and other things, we are fine.
Right. Another question, and I'm sure that people who would be using CleverTap might have it on their mind, is like let's say we're talking about an IPL like example where across multiple apps itself, like somebody has some IPL related game going on, Dream11 has some contest going on, and like the match will play somewhere. Some food ordering app will also have a match related game. So all of them probably might be using CleverTap. So like how do you ensure, like, let's say some kind of a blow up on one end does not really stop the data collection happening for a different client? Because like when you put the SDK, the endpoint where it goes to, like and what is visible to the consumer is that clevertap.com, it's going there only. So how do you ensure that because of somebody having a blow up, others are not affected?
Right. So when we collect data, so we have different queues for different accounts. And so, for example, if for God forbid, but for some reason one of the accounts is facing some issues due to any XYZ reason, right?
Data is corrupt.
So, yes, exactly.
Really, very huge amount of data come in because of some DDoS kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So then, like the other accounts have their own specific queues in which they have data flowing in. So technically, those data can still continue to flow. We have some mechanisms of the queue processing as well. So for example, if our storage due to some reason is not responding at the speeds that we desire it to, we penalize those queues for a little bit so that the other accounts are not affected.
Right.
Sometimes when we also reroute these queues to some dedicated clusters, so that like there is limited interference between the two. So these are again special cases handling.
Right.
But in a normal world, so the penalizing part that I talked about, it happens for a very small amount of time. So it's not like that you penalize the customer for a very long time, but for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and then it retries it. So that way you ensure that the other queues process fast enough, and then once the other account is back on track, we again continue with the ingestion.
Right. The one question I definitely wanted to ask was about, you're talking about this events getting stored, like the older events and all. You have a proprietary database, so like, given there are so many databases out there, like why would you need to build one yours, and what is it that's really a limitation of most of these, like, Postgres, MongoDB and all, like off-the-shelf databases? What is the limitation that you hit where you need to have your custom data storing solutions?
Yeah. So while we designed this new database, it's called the TesseractDB, about 2.5 years back, we performed scale tests against various options, including Mongo. By the way, we do use Mongo for storing some of the account level information and other things, but of course not for events. So when we actually scale tested it against some of the common open source databases, they were not making the cut of the throughput requirements of both one of the queries and also the ingestion. Because for us to be able to ingest data in real time and also making that data available for querying and analytics at the same time, the consistency and all the other things were not meeting up to our benchmarks or the numbers that we desired we wanted to be. So that's when we actually moved further into, so we already had a proprietary in-house database before TesseractDB as well. We extended it for a mix of columnar and row based and the older formats that we used, in such a way that it's cost optimized but at the same time without any impact on the throughput. So long story short, the real answer is that the open source solutions or whatever we tried with did not meet our desired criteria.
Right. And I mean, obviously, like, going out and designing your own DB is not like a very trivial thing to do. So usually, what are sort of the challenges that you face in a day-to-day maintaining your own custom DB as well?
Right. So for example, just to give you very simple examples, right? So we have disks, disk storage on which we store data, right? So now, like, those disks could get filled up, right? So we have these alerts making sure that you get the disk alerts. Then even the RAM usage, basically, like, we have configured an optimal level that this is the ideal memory utilization for our storage system, and so we have alerts designed for each of these. So whatever, now to summarize these examples, whatever parameter we feel that could potentially be a hindrance to the right performance of the system, we have correspondingly designed those alerts. And some of the maintenance just doesn't include the newer versions that we roll out, right? It also includes your like the infra thing. We actually partner with AWS. For example, we use ARM boxes right now from Intel. So that helped us save about 25-30% of the costs. So yeah, I mean, it's always a continuous process that we get involved with all the different technical AWS discussions. So AWS is our cloud partner, and we continuously get new inputs from them.
Right. And this thing, so on the cloud as well, like very old data, like 5-10 years old. So usually you might be oftentimes putting that into like more slower storage as well, like on disk or rather than an SSD kind of a thing. So that, I believe, also comes with the challenges. Sometimes, like, disks have certain number of times after writing you can't read from them and those kind of things.
Right.
So those also you have monitoring and all in place.
So basically, like, the IOPS with the newer volumes of AWS, they do not have those burst limits and other things that they had in the older models. So that's exactly the one of the things that we continuously iterate on. So we know that with this kind of a number and for this kind of a throughput, this is the max IOPS you would need. We actually don't go and write even smaller bytes onto the disk. We make sure that there's a burst that we continuously write. So that way we minimize the number of IOPS. While reading the data as well, we read higher chunks of data, so that, like, you don't end up going to the disk for smaller chunks of data and exhaust the IOPS. All these read writes and all, they are optimized such that the IOPS utilization is optimal.
Understood. I mean, a lot of the part of designing your own database definitely involves, like, obviously tinkering with the file ops layer itself on that. So one thing, interested if you have any recent stories of migrations. And I'm sure, like any of these layers. Like let's say you have AWS provides you with a better class of hardware, or let's say you have data lying on a DB and you have come up with a more optimized version of your own DB and you want to migrate.
Right.
How do those things play out?
Right.
Like, do you have your for clients dashboards not available for a while, or are you able to do it real time?
Right.
Any recent migration stories if you have to share?
Yeah. So one of the major migrations we had was during this Tesseract phase, which was roughly around 2 years back, I would say. So that is the time we had asked for a downtime because we were changing the storage format and a lot of other things.
Right.
So there had to be a window of 4 hours to 6 hours where we were down. Of course, that happened all during the night. It did not happen during the day. So yes, we do require downtimes, and that time our backend storage is not available. And even today, like if we are upgrading it to the new hardware or any other things that goes behind the hood, we do require a blackout time.
Right. And during the migration, like just like if I want to take a peek into how it happens,
right,
like across the team, the ops and the process,
right.
How does that happen?
Sure. Yeah.
What all safeguards do you have in place and all? Because the migration is really a big event at an office, right?
Right. So we have a lot of important actually checklists that we do. Like once we have, say for example, if we are migrating to a newer infrastructure, or if we are moving to a newer protocol completely, right? One of the most important things that we have is we first have, like at an infra level, the integrity checks, making sure that what we transfer is the right data.
Right.
Okay. There are validations done by a different team member, making sure what is going is right. And then at a software level, we also have data integrity checks.
Okay.
So which actually, so for example, like if you are transferring 1 billion profiles from one kind of a cluster to another kind of a cluster, at the end of all this activity, you should still have 1 billion profiles.
Of course.
Right? I mean, because like sometimes in copying and all, we all have observed in the past, you end up, like some exception somewhere which gets silently eaten up. And like you come to know, like after the customer tells you, like my 2% users are missing. so that is a conversation we really don't want to have.
Right.
So that also for the event data and other things that we have, of course, we can't afford to scan each and every row and say what exactly data is present. But even for those, we have a higher level meta that we maintain and make sure that these metas match across the different phases of the migrations. So Tesseract migration was a big one because we were moving to a completely different format. So there we had implemented, reconciliation methods where something that was before should be exactly same as after.
Right.
So even if it's a new engine, whatever be the case, the analytics should match, the number of users, events, everything should match. So and we did not have any tolerance there.
Right. And in terms of like, because you're on a topic of migrations, so if for example ever like the format in which the SDK sends data, or like these processes around how the retry happens and all, if these anytime need to be updated or migrated to any changes, so given the challenges that like you were saying, if you make a change today, 100% people using it might be 6 months down the line, 1 year down the line. How do you what is the process of going about, let's say, changing something like that in the SDK? Like if the data format needs to change or some field needs to be updated or something like that.
Yeah, so it's
compatibility and all, how do you manage those things?
So that's what. So anything major which needs to go out, it's like, so it's me, the DevOps guys, the backend, everyone sits together that, okay, this is what we want to do. And this is when we'll target to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are a lot of changes which need to be done on the backend infra side, and then plus our bandwidth and our projects and everything. And then after this also, right? Like once we release, you need to support it for at least a year and a half, because that's the timeline we see that it gets adopted.
Yeah.
So what I do is that I usually try to bring in all these big changes when Google tells everyone to update their Android versions, because that is the version gets adopted the most and the most quickly.
This changelog and compatibility docs, I remember at Zomato there used to be like this version of Jetpack libraries and Android X version, you have to use this version of this. If you go up this version, then you can't use this version. XYZ features will not work.
Android X migration was a big one, because it was very difficult to know, because we have like so many clients, who's on what version. We have like, it's very difficult to get actual numbers on that, and even from Google's process also, it was like you have a lot of time to do it. You can do whenever you want to do it. So there was.
But you have to do a lot of steps simultaneously.
Yeah,
that was the problem.
That was the problem, and some people would be happy with something, some people would not be happy with something, and then we took the longest time to actually move to Android X because of that uncertainty. And then I was like, okay, let's just do it, and then give them the whole table, like you saw, right? Like this version will map to this version, and please use this, and then just use Jetifier. And actually that helped. And they came out with the Jetifier thing so late into the whole thing that I was like, you should have just started with this.
There's also like 3 stages, like pre-Jetifier, then with Jetifier, and then disable Jetifier once you have everything migrated.
So you should have led with Jetifier, like just add this one key value, and then everything should just automatically migrate. But then, I don't know, it's they also have their own plans in place. So we followed that. So even let's say, for example, Android 12, Android 13, all these versions keep coming up, and for certain things we have to do it a little bit late or just before Google is setting up a deadline. And for things like Android 13, because it was changing the push notification permission, we had to do it the earliest, because that is again core business, and everyone was skeptical what will happen to my tokens and my will I be able to send push notifications or not. Thankfully Android did it very well, and we had to do the release pretty early into the deadline is like still I think this year, like August 31st, thankfully. But coming back to your question is that we sit. It has to, for me, like for SDK, anything is like 6 months to 1 year project, because we need to know the repercussions as well, right? Because if I change let's say recently we had to change the domain name, right? Now we could do it in iOS because it's the number of users compared to Android is 1/4, 1/5, right? So they have for Android we have a lot of customizations and optimizations actually. For iOS it's okay, because again, like overall in terms of volume it is less, right? So the domain change went pretty easily in iOS. Now in Android I'm gonna do it soon. So DevOps team is like, when will you do this? So it's because now I need to think that, okay, if I do this, where all will it affect? Because now it's not just like, I think back in your time when you were probably using it in Zomato, it was like one SDK, right? Now we have like modules, and then we have like different
push analytics and everything is separate.
No, it's not. So we have we do not break it down that way. We still have one SDK for all the features. We have modules for things which you might use. So for example, if you want to use Xiaomi push, it is not something which everyone wants to use it. It's a separate module. Same thing for Huawei, because again Huawei is just in the Southeast Asia region, so it's just for them, and it doesn't work with Google pretty well. So again, that's a different thing. So that's why a separate module. Things like geofencing, which require Google policy changes, and you need to tell Google that I'm using this for this particular use case. That is a separate module. So, but again, like things will. What if I do this change? Where all it will get affected? All it needs to be checked. So it starts off pretty early in the cycle that, okay, if you want to do this, for me it will take like a good couple of months just to figure out where all things will get affected. And then I try to streamline it with the Android releases, because that is when people, or Android or iOS updates, right?
Yeah.
Because once that happens, everyone is really on board to use the latest version because they have to.
Yeah, and then also there's what Android has that every September there's a push to deprecate an older
Correct.
SDK.
This time it's August.
That time you can get everybody on board to update libraries
Yes,
because
libraries.
people are doing that.
And that's when I do the most breaking changes also. And like they'll happily do it this time.
Yeah.
Because there's bandwidth allocated for just updating all your libraries to the latest version, right? So
Yeah. So I mean, I spent a while doing mobile consulting, and like I mentally used to say that there are like bucket of two companies. One where they're always using the latest libraries.
Yeah.
Like every week they will update and all of that. And then there is another bucket where it will be September. There will be a task force 1 month. Like you have to update everything because things will get deprecated. Because there will be multiple libraries which are on the older main SDK and that does not
and
support.
we have GitHub issues from both. Because someone is like, oh, this feature is out on this latest Android version, why don't you have it?
Yeah. So
And
the cutting edge people have
Yes.
one problem on that side of the
Yes.
spectrum, and the laggards have another problem
Yeah.
on the other side of the
And
spectrum.
then you're like, why don't you give us time to, update this? I'm like, Google is not giving me time, no? So how can I give you time? So it's like that.
Nice. One final aspect I want to talk again from both of you in terms of teams and all, right? This was about the tech challenges and all, but around your org and team challenges also. So especially like one by one, I would want answers from both of you on hiring, onboarding people, and getting them into the mix of this environment, which I believe might be new for a lot of people. Like processing data of this scale is not something not a lot of people who might be joining your team have past experience, and I think on the front end side that's even more.
Yeah.
Like finding people who have worked on SDK is absolutely rare. So having people who are working on the consumer side of things, they're coming in. So when you're hiring, and I like both of you one by one, but what kind of things are you looking for in each of your teams? And then how do you ensure that the onboarding, they gel well with this setup? Maybe if you can go ahead.
Sure. So I think one key thing that we look for is, apart from the technical skills, is the clarity in the thoughts or the clarity in the ideas. Because we strongly believe that given a problem, if you are able to think it out clearly, you can break it down into multiple parts and solve it, those individual modules. So this is a far important skill, and even like the questions that we asked during or rather we don't call it questions, actually it's more of a conversation, where we try to understand that whether the candidate is able to break the big problem down into smaller subparts, solve with them individually and build over it. And we never focus on being able to like answer it without any flaws. In fact, we just nudge, oh, do you want to think in this direction, do you want to think in that direction? Because it's often in a team that like we all work together, where like everyone is throwing ideas, everyone is giving directions, and then like you choose the right one and you move forward with that. So that is the real kind of things that we typically end up testing in the technical aspect of things, and also the technical knowledge. So it's not important for a person to know everything. It's okay if the person doesn't know things, but whatever he knows, he needs to know it in depth, which is a very important thing, because there'll be a definition written in some part of the world that okay, this does that, or something helps you does XYZ.
Yeah.
But then like being able to know that what is the cost of using that kind of a, say for example, everyone will start talking about Redis to do XYZ, or Kafka for PubSub and all these things, right? Now, if you want to do something at a smaller scale, can you handle this, or are you able to do this? Can you work from your first principles and come down and break down the problem into smaller parts? So that's a far important skill.
That's a far important skill. And then how do you sort of onboard people? Do you have like a some sort of internal program, or is it pairing? How does that work out?
Yeah. So usually we have a entire onboarding process. In which so basically getting a new person in basic up to speed, along with some training exercises, all those things are set. After that, the senior members of the team end up mentoring or coaching for the next couple of months till the user is completely on to speed. Otherwise, like, we have some good documentations around some of the critical components, not just within the code and outside the code as well.
Right.
So, like, a new person coming in has the resources to get up to speed in, say, less than like 2 months, I would say.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
And how about you? How are you going about hiring?
So yeah, like as you said, not like SDK engineering is like a very niche.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to, like, initially I thought it was difficult. Then I approached it in a different way. So what I did was I started asking people that, okay, you obviously, like, not a lot of people have worked on libraries, but have you seen anyone working inside? Like, for example, if so I asked them, what libraries do you use, right? So Retrofit and Glide and Exoplayer and anyone you pick, I just start going deep down into that. Like, okay, how does this work? How does this work? Like, do you know how this works? Have you seen inside how it's working? And even if if someone has just done that, that means there is curiosity and there is enthusiasm to know how it works. Right. And that is enough for me, because the rest of the stuff I can still teach on how things will work at CleverTap. Right. That is one aspect of it. And the like he said, right, you do not have like, this is the question, this is the answer that is expected. It's like, give us a broad answer, right? Like, we want to know your thinking process, because if you're looking to solve problems which have not occurred before, you can't have answers ready, right? Like, you need to think, you need to experiment, you need to try, implement something, fail, learn from it, and so that is what we try to look out for, because enthusiasm, curiosity, and then if they fail, then we are there to pick you up and help you out again, and that's qualities we look for. Obviously, tech skills, that those can be tested, right? Like, you can ask, like, when it comes to Android or when it comes to iOS, there are few limited set of things which are happening in the world. Have you used them? Some demo around it, which is that's all, right? Like, but then how do they use those? Like, everyone can probably write code in Kotlin today, but can you solve my problem, which I put in front of you tomorrow? So that's the thing. And then when it comes to onboarding, I have tried out I have multiple things to do. So initially, when for my team, I did not have that set of documentation. So onboarding, like, there is like the HR onboarding, the proper tech onboarding, knowing the product and everything is pretty much standard across teams. Right. But when it comes to SDK nuances, what is happening where, initially, like, I think last year it wasn't there. I've built this out, like, in the last year. I've written a lot of documentation myself. I used to do two approaches: either throw them in the deep end, so and so people who that is also like a litmus test, because people usually, and I think a lot of times people do pass that, because they really want to work on something, right? Like, because they come with those aspirations that I will join a new job and I'll do a lot of things, new things which I was probably not getting a chance to do in my previous company. So a lot of people do pass that, and then for others, like, if they fail, then I take them step back, and then okay, now let's create a plan around them, mentoring the person with some senior person, and then like that. So I try out different things based on the quality of person coming in. So I keep experimenting that way.
Right. Because you mentioned enthusiasm.
Yeah.
In the answer, I just want to ask. I think too much enthusiasm during SDK development might be a constraining factor. Also, you have to be a little conservative, like use old and boring stuff rather than too cutting edge, new age stuff, because that's probably something you don't want to do on an SDK, right?
Yeah. So I tell my team that you can come up with ideas, right? Like,
I'm just asking it from a mindset shift kind of a thing. Like, when you are using a consumer product, you can oftentimes go for the latest and greatest stuff. With an SDK development, that's not probably the best idea, right?
I have to, like, channel that energy into something else, right? Like, so for example, one of my team members joined last year, and he was very enthusiastic about learning new things and implementing them. And obviously, like, during the interviews and all, I'm very clear. You're gonna work on boring stuff, right? But it is of impact. Right. So now that guy joined, and then he was still enthusiastic. Right. I want to learn new things. I was like, okay, take GitHub Actions, and implement this for me into our SDK. Like, so we were writing unit tests, we were running it locally because the team was like 2 people, and then we hired 2 more people, and out of this, one of them was like super enthusiastic about learning things. I told him, okay, we have unit tests, put them into a pipeline, and he learned about it. So he was also happy that okay, he got to learn a new thing.
Channeling that is
channeling that is the thing.
Doing thing. Okay, and final question, which I think I have to ask, otherwise I will get a lot of brickbats because GPT and all is in the discussion everywhere. So like lots of AI tools, just I think lots of releases last few months and all. So are you all trying out any of those things, like when you're seeing the dashboard, maybe some summarized insights or any such things that you're seeing?
Yeah. So we do have some of the ChatGPT on our planning.
Yeah.
And there is some bit of work also which has started. But yeah, I would wait for the the real release to come out before commenting more on that.
Right. But you're thinking of integrating it AI in some. Nice. Cool. So I think that was all I had. But thank you so much. Really insightful questions. I think got a lot of great answers, and people who would be watching this who would want to also know a little bit more like what happens behind the scenes, at a place like CleverTap. I think thank you so much for all the answers.
Thank you so much for having us here.